Hundreds of global defense leaders and military officials wrapped up a series of dialogues aimed to tackle geopolitical and economic threats in the Pacific region. Hawaii-based think tank Pacific Forum held its annual Honolulu Defense Forum in Alohilani Resort in Waikiki this past week. The head of the Philippines Armed Forces shared his concerns about ongoing threats in his country.
Right now, the Philippines is really facing a big challenge from China's expansionism. They're trying to claim a big portion of the South China Sea, including a big portion of the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. And so what we're trying to do is that we're trying to build relations with our allies and partners, particularly the United States of America. We're strengthening our partnership, and we're doing more activities together, like joint exercises, joint trainings, joint sails in the South China Sea in the spirit of freedom of navigation, making sure that we promote a rules-based international order.
Officials from the U.S. Department of War shared efforts by the Trump administration to grow the industrial manufacturing and shipbuilding capacity here in Hawaii to compete with China.
Building upon that sort of vision of more robust capability, faster, more reasonable certification processes, we will find opportunities to aggregate demand from all the various disparate forces on the island that usually get their stuff from the States through DLA and other sources, that they're going to bring those capabilities forward and be able to solve the problems as an ecosystem here in the island.
Attendees also discussed North Korea, Russia, and Taiwan. Indo-PACOM Admiral Sam Paparo, Japanese Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi, and Palau President Surangel Whips Jr. all gave keynote remarks. You can find more information on our website.